Storing these foods incorrectly can affect their taste, nutritional quality, and sometimes even cause health problems. Let's find out how to ensure that meals for the elderly are always fresh, safe, and nutritious. How to store tomatoes to keep their fresh taste. Tomatoes are one of the most common and nutritious vegetables used in many dishes, such as salads, soups, pizzas, or sauces. However, to maintain their fresh taste and nutritional value, proper storage of tomatoes is extremely important. One common mistake many people make is putting tomatoes in the refrigerator. Although the fridge can slow down the ripening process and store tomatoes for a longer time, refrigerating them can cause them to lose much of their natural flavor and sweetness. When tomatoes are stored in cold environments, the starch in the tomato transforms into sugar, which reduces the sweetness and creates a bland taste, making them less appealing than when they were freshly bought. Furthermore, if the refrigerator is too cold, the skin of the tomato can become mushy and tough, losing its crispness. Therefore, the best way to store tomatoes is to keep them at room temperature. Room temperature, which usually ranges from 18 to 27 degrees C, 64-72 degrees, helps tomatoes retain their freshness and natural flavor. Store tomatoes in a dry place, avoid direct sunlight, and keep them away from strong-smelling foods like onions or garlic, as tomatoes can absorb these odors and lose their distinctive taste. Additionally, when storing tomatoes, make sure not to stack too many tomatoes on top of each other, as the weight may crush the ones at the bottom. Instead, you can place them on a tray or rack, ensuring that the tomatoes do not touch each other. If you want tomatoes to ripen more evenly, you can place green tomatoes in a paper bag at room temperature. This will allow them to ripen gradually without compromising their quality. However, if the tomatoes have already over-ripened and you cannot use them immediately, you can refrigerate them to extend their shelf life, but be aware that they will lose their fresh flavor when eaten. By following this storage method, you can enjoy fresh, flavorful tomatoes that retain their natural taste for a long time. How to store potatoes to keep their fresh taste. Potatoes are a common food item in many dishes, from fries, stir-fries, and soups to mashed potatoes. However, to keep potatoes fresh and maintain their natural flavor, it is essential to store them correctly. One of the most common mistakes is storing potatoes in the refrigerator. When potatoes are kept in a cold environment, the starch in them turns into sugar, giving them an odd sweet taste and causing them to lose their delicious natural flavor. Particularly when potatoes have a sweet taste, not only does it affect the flavor, but it can also cause them to lose their nutritional value. So what is the best way to store potatoes to maintain their quality and flavor? Potatoes should be stored in a dry, cool, and well-ventilated place with an ideal temperature ranging from 7 to 10 degrees, 45-50 degrees. A dark space, such as a cupboard or a closed container, will help protect them from direct sunlight. Sunlight can cause potatoes to produce solanine, a natural toxin that makes potatoes taste bitter and can be harmful if consumed in large amounts. When storing potatoes, avoid placing them next to strong-smelling foods, as potatoes can absorb these odors and lose their natural taste. Additionally, do not store potatoes for too long, as they may sprout. Potato sprouts contain solanine, so if you find sprouted potatoes, you should remove them before cooking. Also, avoid putting potatoes in sealed plastic bags, as they need airflow to stay fresh. Instead, you can use a paper bag or a ventilated basket to prevent moisture buildup. If you've cooked potatoes but cannot finish them, you can store the cooked potatoes in the refrigerator, but it's best to consume them within a few days to maintain the best flavor. With this storage method, your potatoes will remain fresh and retain their original taste, allowing you to prepare delicious and nutritious meals. How to store onions to keep them fresh. Onions are an essential ingredient in the kitchen, used in countless dishes, from stir-fries and soups to salads, stews, and grilled meats. However, storing onions properly is crucial to ensure they stay fresh and don't spoil. One common mistake is storing onions in the refrigerator. Although the fridge helps extend the shelf life of many foods, onions are not ideal for cold storage. The high humidity in the fridge can make onions soft, moldy, and cause them to lose their natural crispness. Additionally, onions can absorb odors from other foods in the fridge, which affects their flavor. To maintain their freshness and signature taste, onions should be stored in a cool, dry, and well-ventilated place at room temperature. The ideal temperature for storing onions ranges from 15 to 20 degrees Celsius, 59 to 68 degrees Celsius. Keep them away from direct sunlight, which can cause sprouting, leading to shriveled and less fresh onions. Also avoid storing onions near other vegetables like potatoes. Onions can absorb ethylene gas from potatoes, causing them to spoil faster. Never store onions in sealed plastic bags, as the lack of air circulation can lead to moisture buildup and mold. Instead, use paper bags or mesh baskets that allow airflow to keep them dry and fresh for longer. If you've already cut an onion and haven't used the whole thing, you can store the remaining portion in the fridge, but make sure it's tightly wrapped in plastic wrap or kept in an airtight container to prevent the onion smell from spreading and affecting other foods. Use it within a few days for best flavor and freshness. With these tips, your onions will stay crisp, mold-free, and ready to enhance any meal with their distinctive flavor. Hikurushorni, tsunemanoni, hamanas how to store bananas to keep them fresh. Bananas are a delicious and nutritious fruit, rich in vitamin C, potassium, and fiber. However, keeping bananas fresh and tasty requires the right storage method. A common mistake is putting bananas in the refrigerator. While many fruits benefit from cold storage, bananas do not. The cold temperature of the fridge can cause the banana peel to turn brown or black, making them look unappetizing. Although the appearance changes, the fruit inside usually remains edible. However, the altered look may affect the eating experience. So what's the best way to store bananas? Keep them at room temperature in a dry, well-ventilated space. The ideal temperature range is between 18 to 20 degrees Celsius, 64 to 72 degrees Celsius. Place them on a shelf or fruit stand, away from direct sunlight, as sunlight speeds up the ripening process and may lead to quicker spoilage. If you want bananas to ripen gradually, simply leave them out for a few days. If they ripen too quickly and you can't finish them in time, refrigerate the ripe bananas to extend their shelf life. Just note that the peel will darken, but the fruit inside can still be used for smoothies, baking, or other desserts. To further slow the ripening process, consider separating the bananas. Detaching each banana from the bunch helps reduce the release and spread of ethylene gas, which speeds up ripening. By following these tips, your bananas will stay fresh, naturally sweet, and easy to enjoy at any time of day. How to store watermelon to keep it fresh. Watermelon is a summertime favorite, loved for its sweet, juicy flavor and high content of vitamins A and C, plus various minerals. However, proper storage is key to preserving its freshness and nutritional value. Many people tend to store whole watermelons in the refrigerator, but this is not the best approach. Keeping an uncut watermelon in the fridge for too long can reduce its flavor and nutrient content. Cold temperatures can dull the natural sweetness, and some vitamins may degrade over time. Refrigeration can also diminish the fruit's overall freshness, making it less enjoyable. Instead, if you haven't cut the watermelon yet, it's best to store it at room temperature, around 18 to 20 or 64, 72 for a short period. A cool, dry, and shaded place will help retain the fruit's nutrients and taste until you're ready to eat it. Once cut, watermelon must be stored in the refrigerator. Wrap the leftover pieces tightly with plastic wrap or store them in an airtight container to prevent exposure to air. This keeps the fruit fresh and flavorful for up to 3 to 5 days. To extend its shelf life further, you can cut the watermelon into small cubes and freeze them. Frozen watermelon is perfect for making smoothies, juices, or serving as a refreshing frozen treat. By following these storage tips, your watermelon will stay sweet, juicy, and full of essential nutrients, perfect for cooling down and enjoying in any way you like. How to store nuts to maintain their quality. Nuts such as chestnuts, cashews, walnuts, and almonds are not only delicious snacks, but also highly nutritious, providing healthy fats, protein, vitamins, and minerals. However, proper storage is essential to preserve their quality and fresh flavor. A common mistake is storing nuts in the refrigerator, as many people believe it will extend their shelf life. In reality, when nuts like chestnuts or cashews are stored in the fridge for too long, they can lose their healthy fats and fresh taste. The fats in nuts are prone to oxidation when exposed to cold air, which may decrease their nutritional value and compromise their flavor. So what is the correct way to store nuts? These nuts should be kept in a dry, cool place, away from direct sunlight and high temperatures. The ideal storage temperature is between 10 degrees and 20 degrees Celsius, 50 to 68 degrees. You can store them in airtight glass jars or Ziploc bags to protect them from air and moisture, which helps prevent mold and degradation. If you need to store nuts for a longer period, using the refrigerator or freezer is a viable option, but only if they are sealed tightly to block air and moisture. However, even when refrigerated nuts should only be stored for a few months at most, prolonged exposure to cold can reduce their crunchiness and diminish their healthy fat content. Additionally, if you've purchased pre-processed nuts, such as roasted chestnuts or salted cashews, always check the expiration date and follow the manufacturer's storage instructions, as processed nuts are more sensitive to humidity and temperature. With proper storage, nuts can remain fresh, retain their nutritional value and flavor, and be ready as a healthy snack or a tasty ingredient for your daily meals. Now, how to store honey to keep it fresh and smooth. Honey is not only a natural sweetener, but also offers various health benefits, from boosting the immune system to supporting wound healing. However, proper storage is key to maintaining its quality and distinct flavor. One common mistake is storing honey in the refrigerator. While refrigeration may work for many foods, it's not ideal for honey. When stored in the fridge, honey tends to crystallize and lose its natural smoothness, making it difficult to use and less pleasant in texture. Although crystallization doesn't reduce the nutritional value, it does affect honey's ease of use and smooth flavor. So what is the best way to store honey? It should be kept at room temperature in a sealed glass jar or container. This helps maintain its smooth consistency and distinctive taste. Room temperature, around 18 degrees C to 26 C or 64 degrees C to 72 C, is ideal for honey storage. Keep it in a dry, cool place, away from direct sunlight and heat, as both can degrade the quality and nutrients in honey. Thanks to its natural antibacterial properties, honey preserves itself very well. Therefore, you don't need to worry about it spoiling if stored correctly. Just make sure to always close the lid tightly after use to prevent moisture and air from getting in, which could affect the honey's quality. If your honey crystallizes due to low temperature, such as from refrigeration, you can easily return it to a smooth state by placing the jar in a bowl of warm water and stirring gently until it becomes liquid again. This process doesn't harm the nutritional content of honey and allows you to keep using it with ease. With this simple storage method, your honey will stay fresh, smooth, and flavorful, ready to be used in your dishes, beverages, or as a natural remedy for health and wellness. How to store bread to keep it fresh and soft. Bread is a staple food in many households, but keeping it fresh and soft requires proper storage. A common mistake is storing bread in the refrigerator. However, this often causes the bread to dry out and lose its original softness. When stored in the fridge, the cold temperature changes the structure of the starch in the bread, causing it to become dry and hard. That's why bread kept in the fridge often tastes less fresh and lacks the softness it had when first bought. So what's the right way to store bread? Fresh bread should be kept at room temperature in a sealed container to prevent exposure to air and moisture. You can use a paper bag or a Ziploc plastic bag to store bread, making sure to keep out the air. Room temperature, about 18 degrees C to 22 degrees, or 64 degrees C to 72 degrees, is best for keeping bread fresh for a few days. Avoid placing bread in areas that are too hot or humid, as this can lead to mold growth. If you want to store bread for a longer time, freezing is the best option. Freezing preserves the freshness and softness of bread without sacrificing quality. To freeze bread, you can slice it or leave it whole, then wrap it in aluminum foil or place it in a freezer bag to protect it from freezer burn. When you're ready to use it, simply thaw it naturally or reheat it in the oven to restore its soft texture. In summary, the refrigerator is not the ideal place for bread storage. To keep bread fresh for longer, store it at room temperature in a sealed container or freeze it if needed. With the right method, you'll always enjoy soft, delicious bread every time you eat. How to store peaches, plums, and other thin-skinned fruits. Peaches, plums, and other thin-skinned fruits are sweet and fragrant delights, especially popular during the summer. However, to keep them fresh and prevent them from spoiling too quickly, proper storage is essential. One common mistake when storing these fruits is keeping them in the refrigerator. However, the fridge is not the ideal place for storing peaches, plums, and similar thin-skinned fruits. In cold environments, their delicate skins are easily affected, causing the fruits to soften and spoil faster. Moreover, the cold temperature can diminish their natural flavor, making them less sweet and crisp. So how should you store peaches, plums, and similar fruits properly? Fruits like these should be kept at room temperature until they fully ripen. Room temperature, around 18 or 20 degrees Celsius or 64 72 degrees Celsius, is ideal for allowing fruits to ripen evenly and maintain their freshness. Store them in a dry, well-ventilated place away from direct sunlight and high humidity, as excess moisture can cause them to spoil quickly. Once the fruits are ripe and you cannot consume them immediately, you can move them to the refrigerator to extend their shelf life by a few days. However, be mindful that refrigeration may diminish their flavor and freshness. Therefore, it's best to eat the fruits when they are ripe or store them in the fridge only for a short period to avoid compromising their quality. Additionally, if you are unable to use all the fruits in a short time, another option is to process them into other foods such as jams, juices, or freeze them. When frozen, these fruits can retain their flavor and nutrients longer and can be used in desserts or smoothies. With the right storage methods, you can always enjoy delicious, sweet, and nutrient-rich peaches and plums without worrying about them softening or spoiling too quickly. How to store coffee to preserve its fresh flavor. Coffee is a familiar part of daily life, offering a